October 14, 1967, Hampton Sydney College, Virginia. The stage lights hit them like always, and the crowd of college students erupted like always. Marvin Gaye and Tammi Terrell stepped into their positions, two voices about to become one heartbeat. When they performed together, something magical happened that went beyond music, beyond performance, beyond anything the audience could fully understand. "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" began, and the crowd went wild. This was their signature song, the one that told the world love could conquer everything. Standing at their microphones, Marvin and Tammi looked into each other's eyes with that perfect chemistry that made thousands of people believe they were witnessing real love. Tammy's crystal-clear soprano soared over the melody, while Marvin's smooth baritone supported her from underneath. Two voices that fit together like puzzle pieces. The stage lights painted golden halos around them. To the screaming audience, this was romance personified. Two beautiful people singing about eternal love, their voices blending in perfect harmony, their eyes locked in what looked like genuine affection. The crowd ate it up because they wanted to believe in that kind of love, that kind of connection. But what they were really seeing was something deeper, more complicated, and infinitely more rare than romance. Then Marvin noticed something was wrong. Tammi, who never missed a cue, was offbeat. Her timing, usually flawless, was stuttering. There was confusion in her eyes that Marvin had never seen before. She kept singing, but the words weren't coming out right. She was fumbling lyrics she knew by heart, which was completely unlike the consummate professional he knew. And then, in the middle of the verse, she stopped. Her mouth was still moving, but no sound was coming out. Her eyes lost focus, staring at something Marvin couldn't see. Before he could process what was happening, Tammy's legs buckled and she collapsed. Marvin caught her before she hit the stage floor. In that moment, though he didn't know it yet, everything that would define the rest of his life began to unravel. 6 months earlier, in Motown's Detroit studios, Berry Gordy had made what he thought was a simple business decision. Marvin needed a new duet partner, and Tammi Terrell needed a break. She was 22, a Philadelphia native with a powerful voice and stage presence that commanded attention. On paper, it looked like a smart pairing. Nobody expected what happened when they first stepped up to the microphone together. The chemistry was immediate and undeniable. Not the manufactured kind that record labels tried to create, but something organic and surprising. When Marvin's voice found Tammy's, and her voice found his, they created something that was bigger than both of them. Studio engineers who had worked with dozens of duet partnerships stopped what they were doing to listen. "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" was their first recording together, and when they finished the take, there was silence in the control room. Then someone started clapping, and everyone joined in. They had just witnessed something special. But here's what made it complicated. The chemistry was real, but it wasn't romantic. Marvin was married to Anna Gordy, Barry's sister, and that marriage was already showing cracks that would eventually destroy it. Tammi was navigating her own complicated personal life, carrying trauma from relationships that had left scars. But when they stood together at those microphones, all of that melted away. What they had was understanding. Marvin had spent years struggling with depression, feeling trapped by the smooth romantic image Motown had crafted for him. He felt like he was performing his own life, never allowed to show the pain and insecurity that aided him daily. Tammi saw through all of that. During breaks between takes, during conversations in the hallway, she saw the real Marvin, the one who felt inadequate despite his success, who carried wounds that fame couldn't heal. And Marvin saw the same thing in Tammi. Behind her confident stage presence was someone who had learned to perform strength while hiding her own struggles. They were kindred spirits in an industry that demanded perfection while offering very little genuine human connection. So when they performed together, what audiences saw wasn't fake. It was real connection, real affection, real understanding. It just wasn't the kind of love story they thought they were watching. Their voices told the truth their hearts felt, even if their hearts weren't feeling romantic love. The recording process itself became a kind of sanctuary for both of them. In Studio A at Hitsville, USA, surrounded by the familiar smell of cigarette smoke and coffee, with the red recording light glowing above the door, they could forget about everything else. Marvin would arrive early, sometimes spending an hour just sitting at the piano, working out chord progressions that would give Tammy's voice the perfect foundation. When she walked in, usually carrying a cup of tea for her throat, there was an unspoken understanding between them. "What are we feeling today?" she would ask. And somehow Marvin always knew exactly what she meant. Some days they were feeling romantic and dreamy, perfect for ballads like, "If I Could Build My Whole World Around You." Other days they were feeling powerful and defiant, ready to tackle something with more edge. The producers would have their arrangements ready, but Marvin and Tammi would find ways to make each song uniquely theirs through tiny vocal inflections, the way they would echo each other's ad-libs, the spontaneous harmonies they would add in the moment. Berry Gordy understood what he had with them and made sure their recording schedule was protected. While other Motown artists might have to fit their sessions around whatever studio time was available, Marvin and Tammi got priority booking. The engineers who worked with them began to anticipate their needs. The specific microphone placement that captured Tammy's voice best, the reverb settings that made Marvin's vocals float perfectly in the mix. When Ain't No Mountain High Enough hit the charts and Your Precious Love followed, the public created a narrative that Motown was happy to encourage. Here were two beautiful, talented people who were obviously in love, singing songs about eternal devotion. Radio DJs talked about their obvious chemistry. Fan magazines wrote articles speculating about wedding plans. The myth became bigger than the reality. Dick Clark invited them on American Bandstand, and they performed Your Precious Love with such convincing intimacy that teenage girls in the audience literally swooned. Ed Sullivan booked them for 2 appearances, and each time the camera would linger on their faces during the instrumental breaks, catching those moments when they seemed to be having private conversations with just their eyes. Television audiences ate it up because what they were seeing felt genuine, because in its own way, it was. But backstage, after the crowds went home and the lights dimmed, Marvin and Tammi were just 2 friends who understood each other's loneliness. "You're always alone, even in a room full of people," Tammi told him once. After a particularly successful show where they'd been surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. "Even when you're on stage with thousands of people screaming your name, you're alone in there." Marvin had never heard anyone articulate something he'd felt his entire life so perfectly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And when you're gone, that loneliness is going to eat me alive." Tammi laughed, but there was sadness in it. "Don't be so dramatic. I'm not going anywhere." She was wrong about that. November 1967, Tammy's first brain surgery was supposed to fix everything. The doctors had removed as much of the tumor as they could, and for a brief period, it seemed like it had worked. Tammi recovered enough to return to the studio, and Motown, ever focused on maintaining its schedule and profitability, insisted she continue recording. But when Marvin walked into the studio for their first session after the surgery, he knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. Tammi looked smaller somehow, more fragile. The surgery had taken something out of her that went beyond the physical. Her energy was depleted, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of pain she was trying to hide. When they started singing together, Marvin could hear it in her voice, the effort it now took to hit notes that used to come effortlessly. "You okay?" he asked during a break. "I'm fine," Tammi said, but her smile was forced. "Let's just get through this." They recorded You're All I Need to Get By that day, and it would become one of their biggest hits. But Marvin knew it might be one of their last real collaborations. Every note cost Tammi something now. Every session was a struggle against the disease that was slowly claiming her. Over the next 2.5 years, Tammi would undergo 8 separate brain surgeries. Each one was supposed to buy her more time, slow the tumor's growth, give her a chance at recovery. But each surgery also took something away. After the 3rd operation, Tammi started experiencing memory problems. She would forget lyrics mid-song, lose track of conversations. After the 5th surgery, her mobility was affected, and she needed help walking to the microphone. By the 7th surgery, Tammi was spending more time in hospitals than in recording studios. And through it all, Motown kept demanding product. The cruelest part was that Tammy's voice, even as it weakened, remained beautiful. In those final recording sessions, there was a haunting quality to her vocals that was almost supernatural. She was singing through pain, through medication, through the fog of a disease that was systematically destroying her brain. And somehow she was still creating art. Marvin watched it all helplessly. He would sit in the studio, listening to Tammi struggle through takes that should have been effortless, and feel a kind of rage he'd never experienced before. Rage at the disease, rage at Motown for pushing her, rage at himself for not being able to do anything meaningful to help. During one session, he had to excuse himself and walk outside because he couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. The worst part was watching her fight to maintain her dignity. Tammi would arrive at the studio wearing sunglasses to hide the effects of her medication, her hair carefully styled to cover the surgical scars. She would joke about being a little tired when she was clearly exhausted, would insist on doing multiple takes when one take was pushing her to her limits. She refused to let the disease define her, even as it was literally eating away at her brain. Marvin began having nightmares about those recording sessions. He would dream that he was singing alone in the studio, while Tammi's voice grew fainter and fainter until it disappeared entirely, leaving him calling out to empty air. He would wake up in cold sweats, sometimes unsure for a moment whether the dream was real or if Tammi was still fighting in some hospital room across town. He started visiting her more frequently, bringing flowers that she was too sick to smell, sitting by her hospital bed reading her letters from fans who had no idea how close they were to losing her voice forever. During one visit, when Tammi was barely conscious from pain medication, she suddenly gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to lean in close to hear her. "Anything. Don't let them use someone else's voice. If I can't sing, then let the songs end with me. Don't let them pretend I'm still here when I'm gone." It was a promise Marvin would be unable to keep. Later, when Motown brought in other singers to record vocals in place of Tammi's weakening voice, releasing tracks under their names while she lay dying, it felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything their partnership had meant. But Tammi kept working because the work was all she had left. If she stopped singing, she would have nothing but the hospital rooms and the pain and the slow countdown to an ending she could see approaching. The last song they recorded together was The Onion Song in early 1969. By then, Tammi could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. She had to record her vocals sitting down, taking breaks every few lines. It took them 3 days to complete what should have been a 3-hour session. When they finished, Tammi looked at Marvin with tired eyes and said, "This might be it for us, you know." Marvin wanted to argue to tell her she was going to get better, that they would record dozens more songs together, but the words wouldn't come because they both knew the truth. March 16th, 1970, 10:16 in the morning. Marvin was in Detroit when the phone rang. He had been expecting the call for weeks, but when the moment arrived, no amount of preparation could soften the blow. Tammi was gone. She had died in a Philadelphia hospital with her mother holding her hand. She was 24 years old, the same age Marvin had been when he first walked into a Motown studio, an entire lifetime of music that would never be made, conversations that would never happen, laughter that would never echo through recording studio walls. Marvin didn't cry right away. He just sat in silence, holding the phone long after the person on the other end had hung up. He was trying to process what this meant, not just professionally, but personally. The person who understood his loneliness, who saw past his public persona, who made him feel less alone in an industry that constantly tried to turn him into something he wasn't, was gone. The funeral was held in Philadelphia. Marvin attended, though he struggled to maintain his composure throughout the service. Afterward, he returned to Detroit and made a decision that shocked everyone at Motown. He announced that he would no longer perform live. He would still record in the studio, but he couldn't go on stage anymore. The thought of performing without Tammi, of standing in front of an audience and pretending to be happy when he felt shattered inside, was more than he could bear. The stage would always be where they had created their magic together, and now it would forever be haunted by her absence. For months after Tammi's death, Marvin withdrew from everyone. He stopped going to Motown's offices, stopped taking Berry Gordy's calls, and spent most of his time alone in his house, drowning in grief and guilt. The guilt was particularly overwhelming. Marvin kept replaying that moment on stage when Tammi collapsed, wondering if there had been warning signs he missed, wondering if he could have done something differently. Logically, he knew that brain tumors don't work that way, that nothing he did or didn't do could have changed the outcome. But grief isn't logical. 1974, 4 years after Tammy's death. Marvin finally returned to live performance, driven by financial necessity more than desire. He was performing at a small venue in Los Angeles when someone in the audience shouted out a request, "Sing You're All I Need to Get By." Marvin froze for a moment. He hadn't performed any of the Tammi duets since her death, but something about the request, something about the hope in the fan's voice, made him nod to the band. The music started and Marvin began singing both parts of the duet alone. His voice filled the space where Tammy's soprano should have been, creating a haunting echo of what once was. He sang her verses with the same tenderness she had brought to them, and when he reached the chorus, "You're all I need to get by," his voice cracked. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But if you listened closely, you could hear the moment when 4 years of grief broke through the performance. The audience noticed, and there was a brief moment of sympathetic applause. But Marvin didn't acknowledge it. He just kept singing, pushing through the pain because that's what professionals do. They perform even when they're breaking inside. They give the audience what it wants even when what they need is to fall apart. That performance became one of the most emotionally raw moments in Marvin's catalog, a glimpse behind the curtain at the pain he carried every day. A reminder that the voices we love and the songs we cherish come from real people with real wounds, and that sometimes the most beautiful art emerges from the deepest suffering. For the remaining 14 years of his life, Tammi Terrell's death cast a long shadow over everything Marvin did. He never fully recovered from the loss. Friends and family members who knew him before and after 1970 all noted a fundamental change in his personality. The confident performer was gone, replaced by someone darker, more paranoid, more prone to depression and self-destructive behavior. Success without someone to share it with felt hollow. Every achievement was tainted by the absence of the person who would have understood what it meant. In one of his final interviews, conducted just months before his own death in 1984, Marvin was asked about Tammi. His response was darker and more honest than anyone expected. "Tammy's death taught me that nothing in life is permanent," he said. "Everyone you love will eventually leave or be taken from you. The only certainty is loss." He talked about how he had never really processed her death, how he had tried to outrun the grief through work and drugs and relationships, but it had always caught up with him. He said that sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he would hear Tammy's voice in his head, not singing, but saying the things she had told him in those final months. "You're always alone, Marvin, and when I'm gone, that loneliness is going to eat you alive." She had been right about that too. Today, when people listen to Marvin and Tammy's duets, they hear romance, harmony, and the idealized vision of love that Motown sold so successfully. They hear two voices blending perfectly, creating something beautiful and timeless. But what they don't hear is the deeper truth beneath the surface. They don't hear two wounded souls finding comfort in shared understanding. They don't hear the grief that would consume one of them after the other was gone. They don't hear the 14 years of pain that followed, the loneliness that Tammi had predicted with such devastating accuracy. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe the music is meant to transcend the suffering of the artist who created it. But for those who want to understand Marvin Gaye, who want to know why his later work was so dark and introspective, why he struggled with depression and paranoia, why he ultimately met such a tragic end, the story of Tammi Terrell is essential. Because her death didn't just take away a duet partner, it took away his belief that love could conquer anything, that talent could protect you from loss, that tomorrow might be better than today. And once that hope was gone, everything else slowly unraveled until there was nothing left but the inevitable conclusion. This is the story of Tammi Terrell and Marvin Gaye, a harmony that could never be replaced and a loss that could never be healed.